The man who was on watch for the fish thought he'd seen something just before dark the night before. The fish had been expected all day, and the community was talking about nothing else. The older members of the tribe supervised the setting up of racks for smoking the salmon. They had ordered digital thermometers to help give the younger members of the tribe a better understanding of the process. They had enough wood chop to smoke thousands of fish, and then about 3 times as much again. Frank Johnston was one of the federal employees who still went to his office in Spokane to work every day, even though he was sure he would never get paid again. He was the director for Region 12 National Fish and Wildlife. He had a very good working friendship with Chief John Nation. The two men respected each other, and agreements were often made with a handshake. His current estimate for this year's salmon run was calculated at 100,000 fish moving through Omak and Okanogan, Washington. The tribe's share would be 50,000. Frank Johnston and John Nation had worked out for the tribe to catch 5,000 fish per day. Soon, everyone realized that with so many fish coming through, they were going to be understaffed. Chief John grabbed his phone and called the school board president. When Chief John was a kid, the schools let junior high kids out of school if they were working in the fish run, and the assumption was that the high school was closed during the run. The students expected to be busy. Often, if the fathers were working the fish, then the kids would be running the farms and ranches. The girls were assigned groups of workers. They would feed and keep them hydrated. This had become a tradition as the braves of long ago sometimes worked themselves to death. Even 30 years ago, the old-timers remember working to exhaustion. On Monday morning, the junior high students were called to assembly just after the start of the first class. Tony's dad had gotten a call at breakfast telling him of the fish running in the river. They'd been spotted massing in Brewster Lake 5 days ago and entering the river. Now this morning, they'd finally been seen in the river. There were just a few at daylight, then more as the morning passed. The call went out. So 2 hours later, the Taylors were having breakfast. The kids were preparing for another day at school. "Tony, are you going to join the men doing the fishing?" Jenny asked. Tony came alive. "The fish, are they running? You've heard something?" "Yes, the high school is closed, and there will be an assembly first thing this morning at the junior high. Chief John hopes to have first nets in before 10 a.m. Tony held his breath. "Everybody okay if I go do this?" Tony looked at John, then Jenny, then Sally. Ben wanted to help too and got upset that he wouldn't be allowed to. The twins were big-eyed at the thought of big fish. Lucy wanted nothing to do with fish. Willie was excited and wanted to help too. "Ben, after school, maybe Mom and Dad can bring you by so you can learn, okay?" Tony asked. "Okay," Ben pouted. He followed his big brother anywhere and felt he had earned the right to go everywhere. Tony looked at Willie. "You have to learn to swim first." "Swim?" Willie asked. Everybody agreed. Willie needed to learn how to swim and grow a bit. Just a bit later, the 7th through 9th grades and part of the 10th grade were placed into the old empty junior high. For assembly purposes, they joined the elementary school. Willa and Tony, along with Brad and his girlfriend Gloria, were in 10th grade, so they were sitting in the bleachers. The principal stated any boy or girl over 12 who wanted to help with the fish, please stand. Willa was 10 feet away from Tony and was second to stand with him. "Tony, why are you volunteering? You're not a native." Principal Phil Parker looked curiously at him. "I was born here. I hope to live a happy, prosperous life, have many children." Tony looked at Willa when he said this. "Grow old here and die here. This is my home. I only see friends and neighbors. This community may be in trouble with all the earth changes. If I intend to see no one starves this winter, then how can I not help with the fish?" Tony saw Willa clapping and then realized everyone was clapping, including Principal Parker. With that, several others stood and when called, moved down to be with the principal. The list was made, and the volunteers were told their names would be in the Okanogan Record newspaper. A total of 24 kids grabbed their stuff and walked the easy half-mile to the bridge across the Okanogan River. From the bridge, it was easy to see the big salmon swimming in the river down below. They saw men unloading a big net. Tony yelled, "Look over there! Let's go help!" They ran off the bridge and came up to the men and made the job easy. The kids were told to put their stuff in a safe place and introduced the man in charge. A guy named Big Henry had the first net poised to be put out at 9 a.m. The fires under the racks were doing a good job, and he hoped to catch 500 fish today. He had what he called the young crowd, and was proud of their enthusiasm, and even sent the high school kids off to the other 9 stations to help them. He had 8 men for the racks and 8 women on the tables. When they put their first net out, it became apparent when it filled within 10 minutes that this was not what the tribe's historians were talking about. This was going to be a whole lot more. The boys and girls started pulling fish. Some tried to take 2, but it became apparent that 2 flopping 40-pound fish was too much to handle. Big Henry had the girls and the smaller boys take the fish from the table to the 4 men at the racks after the heads had been removed and the guts cleaned out. He positioned 2 men on either end of the net because it was bouncing more than one man could control. As the net emptied, Big Henry and the 4 men were able to pull it onto the shore. His cousin Jason came up in a hurry. "We've hung 100 fish." The 2 men looked at the net. There were still 40 or 50 fish in it. They looked at the table covered with fish. All the kids had at least 1 fish. "Jason, we have 200 fish here or more, and they are weighing in at almost a 40-pound average," Jason reported. "No wonder we could not lift that net," Big Henry chuckled. Just shortly before 10 a.m., Big Henry had the second net in. The first one was empty, and within minutes the second net felt like it was anchored to the earth. The boys and girls each took a fish to the almost empty tables. On the second trip, Big Henry had his second squad start carrying fish to the racks. By 11 o'clock a.m., they had 400 fish hanging on the racks and another full net waiting to be serviced. Big Henry called for a halt by the net. "Girls, you 4 are to oversee us. Listen up, everybody. If they tell you to sit, you take a break. Let them feed and water us, okay?" Big Henry got agreement all around. "And girls, don't worry about the fish until later today. Keep us alive. Anybody that looks tired, you have them sit down and eat and drink and rest." They went back at it, and even with people intermittently having lunch, the feelings were still sky high. Tony and his friend Brad grabbed onto a king salmon that must have come up to Tony's chin. 2 of the girls moved over to help, and even Big Henry moved into a position to smack it with his walking cane. Just as he came down with a killing blow, the fish moved and Tony reacted. The cane hit Tony's right hand, breaking at least 2 bones. Tony didn't scream. He closed his eyes. His face turned white from the pain, and he tried to take a deep breath, and after a few minutes, he had Willa pull his phone out and call Jenny. He had her number listed under Mom. He went over and sat down. Funny, he never listed his real mother under Mom. Jenny was at the pharmacy and was able to grab her new smart car and drive it to the bridge. She was there in a few minutes. Willa had gotten Tony some cranberry juice, but he didn't feel like eating or drinking anything for fear of it coming back up with all the pain. Jenny came over and Willa got another chair so she could sit on Tony's right. "We need something to distract him. John says when broken bones are involved, we have to distract." Jenny was looking around to see if she could find something. "I got it," Willa said. Jenny watched as Willa grabbed Tony by the ears and kissed him. "Well, that'll do the trick." Jenny laughed and then closed her eyes as she tried to ground herself again. Jenny carefully took Tony's mangled hand and laid it out flat. She saw the Christ ports and visualized them both being there. She said the Lord's Prayer, and after a few minutes, Jenny felt the healing was complete. Willa. Jenny looked down after hearing Tony's stomach growl and saw the tent in his pants. "Willa?" A couple of minutes more went by, and Willa shivered. Then, with a dreamy look on her face, she looked to Jenny. "Is that what love is? White Eagle does that to me too." Jenny smiled and snickered. "All the time." Tony made a fist with his hand. It seemed all right. He started to get up. "I need to get back to the fish." "No, you don't," Willa stated. "You eat." "I need to get back to the fish," Tony pleaded. "Tony, you listen to that girl. Today she and her friends are the bosses. Now sit and eat. We are nearing 600 fish. We'll be at 1,000 by this afternoon." Big Henry said, then shook his head. "Sorry I hit you." Tony looked to Jenny. "Big Henry is a really good boss, but he carries a mean club." Then he laughed. "Mrs. Taylor, can you heal a couple of old knees?" Big Henry asked. "I've been on my feet too long today, and my knees are swollen so much they won't bend very good. I can't even get my butt into a sitting position. I'm concerned I won't be able to walk tomorrow. Big Henry, stand in front of me, toe to toe. Jenny could see all the damage in the knees and right ankle. This is going to take a bit of time, Big Henry. Tony, when Willa lets you back up, let's do another net, Big Henry directed. Big Henry and Jenny disappeared. Where did they go? Willa asked. They went to see God. You've been there, Willa. Tony shared, can I go back to work? I guess you'd better. It looks like you're the boss for now. Give me another kiss, Willa giggled. One of the lurkers on the bridge did not like a white man kissing a Native American girl. He was working his way home from being locked up for 2 years of a 10-year sentence. He got into a fight with a white man for the same scenario. The white man was doing okay until Scott Tennis broke a bottle and slashed the man's neck. The man bled out before help could get there. Scott was sentenced for manslaughter. The local courts had seen enough of Scott Tennis and gave him 10 years. Who would have thought that the state pen in Walla Walla would be underwater? The state had nowhere to send him or others like him, so it kept and moved the worst, those with life sentences, and sent the rest on their way with $100 in their pockets. Scott decided to come back tonight when everyone was asleep. Jenny worked on Big Henry for over an hour. Henry asked hundreds of questions. He'd been here the day of the wedding, but this was his first chance to ask away. Jenny found a dozen major things and a dozen minor things that any 2 or 3 of them together could have ended his life. She asked for a large bottle of water and was happy to see her future daughter Gaia carrying a 2-liter bottle. She hugged her and kissed her. Gaia was overjoyed by the attention. Here, help me. Jenny put her hands on either side of the water and said the Lord's Prayer again. She added that the water was to flush the system of toxins. She handed the jug of water to Big Henry. You carry this all day, and when you go to sleep, it had better be empty. You need to drink it all. Jenny watched as Big Henry took a long swallow from the jug. That's good water. Henry smiled. If the water in the dry river is clean, drink it. It'll be good for you. Jenny watched Henry take another long drink. Ready to go back? Your son just had the men put another net in. They are up to 800 fish. Big Henry smiled. I'm Willa's grandma's brother. Maiden is my sister. You are going to be seeing a lot of her. How old is she? Almost 16. When the reservation school closed and she transferred into the city's school system, she lost a grade. Tony was held back and did not begin school until he was almost 7. They both should be in high school. They're 2 friends too. I'm the same age and I'm going to have a baby. As Jenny said this, she heard her son come running. She spotted him just in the nick of time as he launched himself at her. They ended up laughing. Henry, meet my son. He is going to show up in our world in about 5 months. His name is Robert Taylor, and he wants to be called Bert. Hi, Bert. I'm Henry. Glad to meet you. Big Henry smiled as they shook hands. Thank you, Big Henry. You will become the wise man of the people. My big brother wants to know if they can catch more fish. Bert smiled. What's he going to be when he grows up? Henry put the question out. Gaia had been sitting in one of the Christ ports, just watching as her brother got some attention. Tony's going to be the treasurer of the world, the man that helps everyone make a real living like Papa John is doing now. Do you think Tony and Willa would make a good couple? Big Henry asked. Yes, the couples that are coming together currently are here to take on certain projects. You two will find a mate and a new cycle of life will be upon for you. Gaia shared, your immortality gene has been switched on. Your soul has made the decision and you are to be the wise one that sits in the circle of the council. Gaia shared. When will we see the change into heaven on earth? Big Henry asked. When you see Mother Earth in the arms of her mother. The day before, there will be like a bump in the road. At first, nothing will have changed. Then as the current reality fades from memory, you will see new earth and it will become heaven to you. Gaia shared. A short time later, you look tired, Chief. Big Henry said to John Nation. How many fish did you get today, Big Henry? We got a little over 1,000, Big Henry shared. You got too many fish. John Nation complained, what happened to your cane? I've had healing by God. I've been told that I will live for another 100 years, maybe longer. Big Henry smiled. Well, if you can still teach the young ones to fish like this, then we'll need you. Chief John laughed. Big Henry, meet the federal fish guy, Frank Johnston. Nice to meet you, Mr. Johnston. Big Henry shook hands. You're men and women, Frank Johnston looked around. They're my age, aren't they? Are you in your 70s, Mr. Johnston? Big Henry asked. I'm 69, Frank Johnston shared. Close enough that you'd fit right in. Everybody here, except for the kids, is somewhere between 70 to 81. Big Henry responded, You want a job? What's it pay? Frank Johnston was having fun. We don't know. We've been waiting to hear how many fish we can catch, Big Henry replied. Tony was standing there. Do we do another net? No, Tony, Big Henry smiled. Now you catch a fish for your family. That's your payment for fishing. Okay. Tony took 2 steps, then turned around. How? Chief John laughed. We were originally thinking we were going to see 100,000 fish come up this river. But there are lots of fish coming. It's going to be 2 or 3 times that, isn't it? Frank Johnston thought out loud. Maybe more. I hear from Brewster that the lake is still full. I even hear from farther downriver it's also full of fish. We may be seeing close to 1 million. Tony, Big Henry called him back. Come join us. Chief, how many fish can you use? Frank Johnston asked. If Tony keeps catching 40-pound fish, we're going to run out of storage at 70,000 fish. We were thinking 50,000 at a 20-pound average, but then Mother Earth Gaia told us there would be twice the numbers coming. We didn't think twice as big. We need to be able to sell our surplus. Chief John warned, other people will need the food to eat. What if we bought a refrigeration truck? One that could carry 50,000 pounds of fish to Spokane? Big Henry asked. I had a friend of a friend call me last week saying he had just what you are talking about. It's a Peterbilt tractor with low mileage and a refrigeration trailer that'll keep a load at 32 degrees, Frank Johnston shared. He pulled out his phone and started going through the call received numbers. How much will we on? Tony asked. Son, we are talking some big money here. Frank Johnston. Ah, Frank. Tony is not only going to be one of the leaders of the people, but he is also the owner of the local bank, the only bank in operation in the area, Chief John shared. Ah, I apologize, Tony. We are talking about $90,000. Frank Johnston was a little red-faced. Chief, if I get you 100 high honors, $1,000 in greenbacks, do you think we have a good chance to make the deal? Tony asked. Found it. I'll give him a call. Frank shared. Yes, Tony, I do. Chief John replied. Didn't I hear somebody who used to drive those big rigs was out of a job? Big Henry asked. Yeah, that Dunhill guy. He lives over on Elm just west of 2nd Avenue, Chief John shared. He still has it. I told him to fill up the tank and check all the tires, Frank Johnston advised. The fish? Big Henry asked. You guys realize you have to let enough get through to build on what you've got. Mr. Johnston got nods all around. Our future depends on what we do today and tomorrow. I will depend on you to handle this right. It is my opinion that you could go up to 100,000 fish or more and not harm the future. Big Henry and Chief John looked at each other and thought of the possibilities. So do we fill up another net? Tony asked. No, you fish. Big Henry laughed. But first call up that wonderful mom and ask her how many fish she wants in her freezer at home. And ask her if she wants them smoked. Tell her you need someone to pack them home for you. While Tony was on the phone with Jenny, John came into the pharmacy. He liked cream soda, and almost every day he would leave the bank with Patty and April in charge and go say hi to Jenny and have a cream soda. Your dad just sat down with a cream soda in hand. Jenny giggled. She was still trying to figure out if it was the cream soda or if he really was coming to see her. Tony wants to know how many fish he can catch to put into the freezer? Jenny handed the phone to John. Tony, catch 2 a day. John listened to everything Tony had to tell him to bring him up to speed about the one Troy Seco for Chief John and that the fishing was open to everyone. The only stipulation was that this was for survival, not for sport. Tony, I'll see you soon. Ask Chief John to wait a bit and I'll have the money there set. John listened. Do we need fishing poles? John listened some more. Thank you. See you soon, son. I'm going fishing. John smiled. Want to come? Yeah, I think I want to see more of what my son is doing. Jenny smiled. Back at the fishing hole, Tony had been handed Big Henry's best fishing pole. It was set up to catch up to a 70 to 90-pound fish or more with a 100-pound line on it, and Henry thought Tony might need the strength of it to handle even a 40 or 50-pound fish. Henry showed Tony what he needed to do to cast the lure out, and then handed the pole to Tony. Henry had a big wood box that held fishing poles and other gear he'd been collecting all his life. He dreamt of the day when he did not have to travel hundreds of miles to enjoy his favorite pastime. Tony cast out. The lure went almost across the river. It had just barely sunk when a giant king salmon thought it was going to have a meal. Tony was looking at Henry when Mr. King decided he was going to turn down the river. Tony lost his balance and went headfirst into the water. Henry grabbed one of Tony's legs and brought him back. Tony still had the pole and was working as fast as possible to stand his ground as a fish was pulling line, working against the drag. Everybody was laughing at him until the fish turned and headed upstream. When the fish got even with Tony, it cleared the water by 4 feet. Everybody stopped laughing and said, "Oh!" Henry reached out to grab the pole and then realized this was spirit. This is why things went so well today. Henry looked over at Willa. She moved so she was within Tony's eyesight, but on the opposite side of the pole that the fish was going in. She mouthed, "I love you, big fisherman." Tony smiled and nodded as the fish demanded his attention. Here he comes back. Tony started winding the line back in. He did not know that John, Jenny, Johnny, Ben, Peter, and Frank with Dora were 10 feet behind him watching the show. Stephen was there too. Ben walked up to his big brother, tapping him on his side. "Tony, can you make him jump again?" "No, Ben, he does that on his own." Tony laughed. "Why don't you pull him in?" Ben asked. "That's what I'm trying to do. He's bigger than me." Tony grinned, looked to Willa, and then looked to Ben. "Did you see him pull me into the river?" "Yes, I did," Ben answered. "Come on, Ben. Tony needs a bit of space so he can bring that big fish in." Willa took Ben by his hand and they stepped back. "Are you Tony's girlfriend?" Ben asked. Willa was about to answer when she spotted her dad, Billy Nation, and Stephen, her cousin, watching her. She looked back at Tony, then at Ben. "Yes, Ben. Tony is my boyfriend." They heard a yell and turned to watch the big fish fall back into the river. She turned again and looked up at her father. He smiled and nodded. Willa had the courage, but her dad's approval helped her breathing tremendously. Big Henry was talking to her dad and passing on the information he'd heard from his visit with God. The two Johns got together, and Taylor handed the chief a lockable bank bag. In it was 10 bundles of $100 bills. John also included a small bundle of $50 bills for expenses. John also gave the chief the address for Cecil Angstrom. The chief agreed to pick up a load of cars and bring it to Chester. Less than a week had gone by, and the Omak and Okanagan communities realized the value in the little smart cars. Over 200 had been ordered or sold. The little cars seemed to be everywhere and were fast becoming the choice for getting around. The cars with gas engines were being fueled by the 32,000 gallons of fuel still in the tanks of the RVs. A cap full of additives was all it took to bring the octane up, enough for the little gas engines to purr to life. After an hour and a half, Henry was up to his waist in the river with the net. He had a harness around his waist to help pull him back out of the fast-moving river. Billy and John were hanging onto the rope to help pull Big Henry out of the river once he got the fish in the net. The fish was still bigger than the great big net by several inches. They moved as one and brought the fish to the beach. Even the final act had its fair share of excitement, as the fish had different plans. "Everybody else cast off if you are ready," Big Henry announced. He had schooled everyone on what to do when someone had a fish on. Too many lines in the water meant tangled lines and no one able to bring their fish in. Stephen went over to Tony. Willa had brought him one of the lawn chairs. Tony collapsed in it. Stephen took the fishing rod. Seth Wilson was taking pictures for the local newspaper. John and Billy Nation held the fish up as Tony stood next to it. It was longer than his 5 feet 2 inches. Ben came over and they took another picture just for Ben. The fish was over a foot longer than Ben was tall. They had to cut the fish in two to weigh it, and the total was over 100 at 112 pounds. That's what Tony weighed. One of the older ladies stayed to take care of the cleaning of the pole-caught fish. The other 7 had gone on home. John got a fish on and was able to pull in the 30-pound sockeye easily. It only took about 20 minutes of fighting to land it. Several others were also pulling in 35 and 45-pound silver salmon. A pink salmon showed up in the catch. Everybody attached to a pole was catching fish. Stephen brought in the next big king. It weighed in at 70 pounds and fought just like Tony's had. Tony came over and congratulated Stephen on his catch. "Thank you, big fisherman. Your presence in our lives has brought the people honor and good luck," Stephen announced. Tony looked around as Willa joined him. They were surrounded by a crowd of their neighbors and friends. Tony has been accepted by the people and honored with the name Big Fisherman. Billy and John Nation would give Tony an understanding of what that meant later. The most important thing was the acceptance of the relationship with Willa by the tribe. When John showed Jenny the 30-pound sockeye, she thought aloud, "It looks like a baby fish." John laughed and pulled her towards the barbecue. John had her cut off a good bite of the sockeye that was cooking there. As soon as Jenny tasted the sockeye, she closed her eyes and said, "Ooh, that's good. That's what this fish will taste like." John held up his fish as Jenny fed him a big bite from the plate. "Can you catch more?" Jenny asked as she kept looking at the barbecue. John had a big smile. "I'll certainly try, but you have to bring in the next one." "Could I?" Jenny asked, her excitement about to bubble over. "Absolutely." Stephen and Ben sat side by side catching fish after fish. They were laughing and shouting when one or the other had fish on. At about 5:30 p.m., Ben came up to Jenny and said he and Stephen were hungry. Jenny took him over to the big barbecue. Maria came over and told them the silver and sockeye had gone into the big pot with the vegetable stew that was now becoming fish chowder. Jenny filled half a paper bowl with chowder and had Ben taste it. His eyes got big and he nodded his head very energetically. "Yeah, that's good." Willa helped Ben carry his chowder as Jenny carried a bowl for Stephen and 2 big pieces of cornbread. Stephen was like a little brother to her. They were cousins but raised by 2 single men. Stephen had confided with Willa when he had found his mother at the real estate office. She was not there the first time he went, but he did meet Margaret's assistant. On his second visit, he got approval from the principal to go find his mother. When he walked in, she was on the phone. She told whoever it had been, "I'll call you back later. I have something very important I have to take care of." Stephen walked over and pulled her down and kissed her on her cheek. "I love you, Mom." There were pictures of him on her desk in the wall. They had been taken from a distance with a powerful lens. He knew the full story. It wasn't her fault. As he looked around her room, it was apparent he was important to his mother. His mom wiped her eyes, blew her nose, and then started to laugh. "I have dreamed of you walking through that door. Here you are, and I'm crying so hard I can't even say hi to you." Margaret shared, struggling to get it out. "Hi, Mom," Stephen said. "Hi, Stephen. I'm so very glad to see you. You've made my day, my week, probably my whole month. I brought you lunch." Stephen shared. "What did you bring me?" Margaret asked her son. "A peanut butter and jelly sandwich, an apple, cookies, and a bottle of juice," Stephen announced. "That sounds really good, Stephen." They had lunch and got to know each other. Margaret teared up again when Stephen had to leave. She got a hug from her son. Now she was here, watching him catch fish as big as he is, as she took more pictures. "Hungry?" John Nation asked his wife. "Starving," Margaret announced. John got 2 large bowls and filled them full of the chowder. The meal was perfected with a piece of cornbread. They grabbed a bottle of water each and found 2 chairs that they moved to watch their son and friend continue to catch fish. "We have an ice chest here. The boys have it full." "Do we have room in the freezer compartment?" Margaret asked. "Do you remember that white box next to the washer and dryer?" John asked. "Where we have all of the potted plants?" Margaret asked. "Yes, Billy suggested I plug it in 3 days ago. I'm happy to say it is holding 10 degrees just fine." John shared. "Does Mom know how to cook fish?" Margaret asked. "Can she teach me?" "Yes, she has hundreds of years of knowledge that has been handed down from the family," Chief Nation shared. "I'm going to get her. She has to see her grandson catch fish." Margaret started to get up. "Honey, Billy left 30 minutes ago to bring her down here." John informed they should be here any minute. Just then, Ben yelled, "Fish on!" Just then, Billy and Maiden made their way down to the beach. "Hi, John and Margaret. Is that our boy with the fish on?" Maiden asked excitedly. "That's our boy, Mom," John Nation said with a lump in his throat. "He has already caught a fish today as big as he is. He reminds me of his grandfather. When the fish ran, he would just disappear. I'd find him down here either fishing or running the place." Maiden laughed. "When you boys were big enough, we would all be down here." "Can you teach me how to cook fish, Mom?" Margaret asked. Billy brought 2 more chairs over for his mom and him to sit in. Maiden took the chair over by Margaret and sat down. The 2 women started talking, then soon got up and went over to see what was on the grill. "How is the cannery doing?" the chief asked. Chester declared the cooker toast. "We found another one in Spokane, and Cecil has agreed to buy it and transport it tomorrow. By running 2 trucks and making a trip every other day, we're averaging 36 cars a day. Samuel and Sherry are finally catching up and have a few cars on the sales lot. They have delivered almost 200 cars this first week." Billy reported, "I see you closed the highway, 20 bridge. Yeah, there's not enough parking and somebody almost got hit," the chief shared. "They can go down and use the Oak Street Bridge. We have fishing going on down there, but compared to here, there's a ton of parking. I have a surprise for you." Billy and John locked eyes. "What?" the chief asked. "The sockeye loves the dry river. We think they are spawning in the dry lake, and they are laying their eggs and making their way back down the river," Billy said with a lot of excitement. "What do you think, Mom?" Billy asked. The 2 ladies returned from the grill with plates of food. Margaret was sharing with John, and Maiden brought Billy a bowl of chowder. "This is good, but not like yours is." "Mom," Maiden laughed and looked at Margaret. "I hope Stephen says such nice things to you." Maiden was a daughter of a chief of the Colville tribe and married to another chief of the Okanagan tribe, so had a higher place in the world. "What do I think about what son? I want to name the artesian well Gaia's Promising." The chief smiled. "The salmon are using the dry river and lake as a spawning ground. Gaia told us many of the fish would return to the ocean and come back next year. Apparently, it is happening," the chief shared. "I met that little girl. Let's have a plaque made and give it to John and Jenny Taylor at one of our big meetings," Maiden advised. Big Henry called a meeting of all the workers. "Attention, everybody. I have it on good authority that the folks on the sidewalk and housing crews want a taste of fishing. So we are going to become teachers on Sunday. Everybody is to take at least a day off. So half of you plan on leaving at noon on Saturday, and I want you back at noon on Sunday. The other half is to leave here at noon on Sunday, and we'll be back at noon on Monday." "Any questions?" Big Henry asked. "Any suggestions on how we make that work?" Brad, one of Tony's classmates, asked. "Find a partner and work out who leaves when. All that matters is that one of you is here, and one of you is away from noon on Saturday until noon on Monday. Okay?" Big Henry got agreement all around. "Hopefully this will happen again during future weekends," Big Henry suggested. "Now tonight, fishing stops at 8 o'clock. I brought harnesses and ropes to allow all of us to rinse off without being washed down the river. At 9, I want everybody to quiet down and get some sleep. The grill will have food on it all night, and we will have one of the men or me up all night tending the smokers. We start tomorrow at 6 o'clock a.m. We're going to have breakfast catered to us by the People's Trust tent. I want the first net in the water by 7 o'clock a.m. Hopefully, we'll have our fish in by noon. Tomorrow you will see another crew come in and package up the smoked fish. Be friendly with them, but let them deal with it. They'll know what they're doing. Okay to watch, but don't join in. This crew is made up of high school boys and girls who thought they were going to have a vacation while you guys did all the work." Big Henry laughed. "Okay, any questions?" Big Henry looked around at everybody. "It's 6 o'clock p.m. and we have 2 more hours of fishing. Have fun." Everyone returned to the task of fishing. "Big Henry got a few minutes?" the chief asked. "Find a chair and take a load off." Big Henry eased himself down into one of the many chairs nearby. "How are you holding up, Big Henry?" the chief asked. "I'm feeling a whole lot better tonight than I did this morning, Chief." Big Henry smiled. "Jenny took me up to God and performed a healing on me. This body is not ready to run any marathons yet, but it sure feels better." "Think you can go another day or two?" Billy asked. I'll relieve you if you need some time off. Thanks, Billy. I'm thinking I can make 20 days if it goes that long. Check in with me occasionally. Big Henry suggested, maybe relieve me on Sunday so I can go home, take a shower, and put on some clean clothes. I'll do that. Maybe in the afternoon, Billy offered. That would be wonderful. Big Henry laughed. In a little bit, I'm going to show the kids how to take a dip in the river without drowning. After a minute, Big Henry asked, how is the cannery coming? The main cooker is shot. We found a new one in Spokane in a warehouse. Cecil is picking it up for us and we will reimburse him. They wanted $10,000 in greenbacks and we agreed. Cecil is also picking up a rebuilt cooker for $8,000 that we'll keep for a spare or use in tandem with the new one, Billy answered. What are we going to can the fish in? Margaret asked. Billy, show everybody, Maiden requested. Billy pulled out of his carry-all bag a 12Z and a 16OZ can. We have a couple 100,000 of these and we'll be just fine once we get a cooker. We are also ordering several truckloads of replacements and 4 truckloads of quart and pint-sized jars for future canning of vegetables and fruit. Just then, an excited Stephen came up to show his grandmother a 34-pound sockeye salmon. Grandma, look at what I caught. What is it? Maiden asked. It's all red. It's a sockeye salmon. They're really good. Gotta go clean it. Stephen ran off to the cleaning table. John and Jenny Taylor came up carrying 2 fish. One was a silver and the other was also a sockeye. How are you folks doing tonight? Maiden asked. I caught my first fish. Jenny squealed as she jumped about. I see your red sockeye. What are they? And what do you recommend for cooking? Maiden asked. Margaret was also listening. Sockeyes are the fish equivalent of the vegetarian. They have more flavor, and I like to grill mine with a sliced up sweet onion with some slices of fresh pineapple. Once you wrap it all up with some aluminum foil, they do fine on a grill or in the oven. Maria put one on a while ago. It should be about ready to eat now. I'll get you some, Mom, Margaret said as she jumped up and headed for the grill. Thank you, Margaret, Maiden shouted after her. Okay, if we join you once we have the fish cleaned? John asked. You and your wife are always welcome, White Eagle, Chief John stated. We will be right back. Got some fish to take care of. John chuckled. Margaret came back, her plate piled with salmon and a handful of plastic forks. I brought enough for everybody to get a good taste of the sockeye. Maiden took a big fork full and her eyes got big. My, that does have a really good flavor. John and Jenny came back and got to share a sample of the sockeye. John caught a 30-pound sockeye after Tony had caught the 112-pound king. I was teasing him about catching a baby fish. He took me over and had me try a bite of sockeye and then a bite of the king. What a difference. I'll still eat both, but the king needs vegetables and rice to go with it. The sockeye can be eaten all by itself. Jenny shared, I am so amazed that I caught a fish. I can't wait to tell the kids. Ben came running up with a silver that was all he could carry. Do you need help with that, son? John Taylor asked. I got it, Dad. Ben was working hard but was determined to make it to the cleaning table. In 3 or 4 minutes, he was back and put the fish in the next ice chest. Big Henry got up and looked at the ice chest. Can I get some help? I want to move the chests that are full out of the way. Both Johns and Billy helped Big Henry move about 25 chests. The fish were still being caught every 2 or 3 minutes. 2 of the girls were helping Maria with the cleaning. Ben had just returned to Stephen's side when Ben shouted, Fish on! Stephen was being pulled towards the river and Tony was there. Ben was working hard not to let his friend get pulled into the river. Stephen yelled, Tony, take the rod! Tony told Ben, Get the chief! Ben came running, but all 4 of the men were already on their way. When Tony looked up and saw the chief, This is a big one and I'm done in for today. Please take the rod, Tony requested. John Nation worked the reel, and when the fish jumped across the river, there was no doubt he was in the same class as Tony's 112-pounder had been in. The line went slack. He's coming back. Tony knew too well what this routine was. Wind the reel fast, John, Big Henry advised. When the line went taut, the fish jumped again. Now he was about 40 yards downstream. There he is, Dad, Stephen shouted. John Nation was in a fight. and he truly didn't know if he was going to win. His rod swung upstream, and the drag and the river were having their toll on the big guy. John endured an hour, and 6 times the fish made the extremes on the line, both upstream and downstream. Let's see if I can net him. Big Henry put 2 of the harnesses on again that he had brought from home and had given a rope each to Billy and John Taylor. When he had waded about 4 feet in, the fish passed him and he struck with the net. "Got him! Pull me out, guys! Keep the line taut, Chief." Slowly, Henry made his way back up onto the beach. "Oh look, you got a baby fish too." Jenny had everybody laughing. Jenny's so-called baby was another 30-pound sockeye who was at the wrong place at the wrong time. That big old net with a 2-foot loop had not only the sockeye but also the monster king the Chief had been fighting. Like Tony's, the fish had to be cut in 2 to weigh. The needle on that little 100-pound scale went to the max. They guessed the fish was just shy of 110 pounds. The Chief turned to Tony and shook his hand. He then turned to his son, picked him up, and congratulated him on catching the second biggest fish. When the Chief collapsed in a chair, Willa handed him a bottle of water and asked if he wanted anything else. The Chief shook his head as he downed half the bottle of water. He looked over at Tony again. "Tony, you truly are the big fisherman." "Thank you, Chief." Tony smiled at the compliment. Willa was standing there taking it all in with a big smile. "Tony, I'm thinking of trophies based on weight. You and Stephen have both earned one. I thought to catch a 112-pound king salmon was going to be a little easier than it was. That fish gave me one hell of a fight. Like you, I'm done in. Maybe by tomorrow I'll be ready to catch another one." The Chief laughed. "If I got another one now, I would look around and give it to somebody else. I felt because Stephen hooked it, that you should be the one to bring it home." Tony shared. "Good thinking, Tony. Stephen and I will be able to talk about this fish for years." The Chief considered.